the Untitled Dinky Story. I will record chapter 3 in a future date. It is, of course, finished, but due to where we are in the world, I don't have really the ability to scream and yell, which is actually a pretty large requirement to actually be able to read that correctly. So this will be chapters 4 and 5, which will be in essence, whereas in essence they are one chapter entitled. Hold on, where are we? Entitled "You Can't Hide Magic Redux," which of course is a reference to chapter 8 or chapter 9 of Past Sins. So this is meant to be one chapter. Unfortunately, it is also about 23,000 words long, so it will be split into two pieces. And I will mention those parts. So here we go. Chapter 4, which will actually be chapter 4 and 5. You Can't Hide Magic Redux. Part 1. Mentors and Proteges. When the news reached Minister Illugia and her retinue that the shaman bearing the kit had crossed the border into Equestria and was presently aboard a Canterlot-bound train, said news was received as a relief. 11 days was a lot of time for 6 zebras to be stuck in 2 small and Spartan rooms in a down-market hotel. The air was stale. They could not go out, since officially they had returned home and were no longer in town, and they could not leave until they knew the results of the test. If the test showed the worst, then the zebra ambassador to Equestria would have to leave surreptitiously that night as well. It would not do to recall him from Zebrica long distance, as that would raise questions that were best left unasked. And so, they were forced to wait. The request for the test and its administrator went out. 1 day of train travel to the border on an express train. Then 1 day on the coal service train to the coal towns. Then 3 days to the capital. Then 1 day of preparation, 3 days back to the coal towns from whence the train started, and then 2 days back to Canterlot. There were in fact no direct train lines to the Zebra capital. Historically, Dakwari, the port town that stood at the mouth of the eponymous Dakwari River, had been Zebrica's gateway to the rest of planet Ekos. The Dakwari Delta was filled with plantations of tropical fruits, and the nearby volcanic Rongoro mountain range housed coffee and tea plantations, and was home to pools of tar pitch that seeped from the earth. This tar burned cleaner and longer than coal, and it powered the steamships that took these crops to the quarry port. There were other higher value goods extracted from the rich mines of Zebrica, but these were things like gold and platinum that were so valuable relative to their mass that they could be transported by small wagon caravans to the port city or to the borders. No, the only trade good from Zebrica that required the use of railroads to export it was bulky coal, which was mostly exported to Equestria anyways, and so this was the only part of Zebrica that was connected to the Equestrian rail network. There was neither need for, nor profit in, extending the rail lines anywhere else. And that was just as the zebras liked it. The zebras, by and large, wished to be left alone. Physical bravery and strength had always been valued in zebra society, and the kings and queens of legend who had unified the zebra tribes through spear and hoof were the subjects of epic poems every foal and fillion Zebrica could recite. But the zebras were far from expansionist, and they kept a wary eye on the griffins and their history of raiding parties, on the dragons, on the bellicose yaks. And yes, even on their equestrian neighbors, who were so similar and yet so different, and whose magical abilities often unnerved the zebras. The zebras, steeped in mysticism, prophetic wisdom, and tales of extraordinary age, often wondered if the ponies truly understood the powers they so blithely meddled with. And then came the day when the Minotaurs poured over the borders, lusting first for the Zebrican gold mines, and then launching a war of total conquest, seeking complete subjugation, and if that could not be achieved, extermination. And then the miracle, the new weapons, the new tactics. And from that point onwards, the Zebra capital city maintained its power over the rest of Zebrica through its link to the miraculous way that the War Council therein had saved Zebrakind from extinction. and keeping the zebra capital and the surrounding core highlands of Zebrica inaccessible from the outside world morphed from being an accident of economics into a core facet of national policy. And so it was, 3 days from the capital to Coalfield, and then 2 days to Canterlot. 11 days for a round trip. 11 days of waiting, but the waiting was over. The time for action was now. Elder Cuthor affixed the red macaw feather that had been removed from Minister Elusia's necklace onto the soldier's own necklace. The zebra soldier sharply saluted Cuthor, and Cuthor returned the salute. As the soldier trotted down the hallway, Cuthor softly shut the door behind him and locked it. He turned to face his companions. In front of him was a relatively young stallion of about 40. He was well-muscled, but somewhat on the heavier side. This was Chirun, who for the last year had served as Minister of Defense, the post that Cuthor himself had held for 3 preceding decades before retiring due to his age. Cuthor had stayed on, acting as the mentor for his younger charged, and though Chirun somewhat resented this umbilical cord, he usually deferred to Cuthor whenever the two had conflicting views. The post of Defense Minister may have seemed superfluous at first, given how the War Council was the most prestigious organ within Zebrica's national government. The Defense Minister was more outward-looking, keeping track of other nations' defenses in order to determine which could pose potential threats to Zebrica, and simultaneously, which nations could act as allies in Zebrica's defense. It was a position that had fit the shrewd, distrustful, and intelligent yet charismatic Cuthor like a glove, and one Chirun was badly suited for. Alas, Chirun's family was politically well connected, and he had legitimately graduated from the Zebra Military Academy as the best in his class. Though Cuthor could hardly see how Chirun's knack for coming up with creative battlefield tactics on the fly during war game simulations suited him in his current role. No one was more keenly aware of the mismatch than Chirun himself. His perpetually sullen air was palpable as he languidly rested on his side on the bed, hoping for the arrival of a resolution. The other bed in the room was presently occupied by a graceful, middle-aged zebra mare. This was Minister Elusia herself, Foreign Relations Minister of Zebrica. She did not rest so much as perch on the mattress of her bed like an alert cat, her limbs tucked under her body. She craned her long neck, adorned with a collar now missing a macaw feather, and looked at Cuthor. "Will he come? Jakohlom, given we are not supposed to be here?" "I'm sure the macaw feather will be proof enough. He will not slight you, Minister. I am certain." Is that what Cuthor sounds like? Yeah, I'll go with it. "I am sure the macaw feather will be proof enough. He will not slight you, Minister. I am surprised you asked me. No zebra worth his stripes will refuse once they see the mark of your office." "I ask merely because Jakohlom is your stallion. You are the one who chose him, and you are also the one who now doubts him. Ambassador Jakohlom is a stickler for formality. He is racing here as we speak, I am sure of it." Cuthor looked around the room. It was spartan and bare. But the zebras were a Spartan folk, and Cuthor was sure it could be cozy in other circumstances. But now, after 11 days in isolation, the air was stale and stifling, and the yellow light from the sodium electric lamppost outside that filtered through the slatted blinds only enhanced the aura of sickly malaise. Cuthor turned to the window, trotted over, and looked out through the blinds. The night streets were growing quieter. He looked down, and was pleased to spot the large cart in front of the hotel. A zebra in the long cloak of a traveling merchant sat on the driver's seat. 4 burlier zebras, who looked like, and indeed were, sailors, busied themselves in the back of the cart, moving crates of goods around to make space. Cuthor turned his attention back inside, for he heard Chirun laughing. "The end of the world," Chirun said and laughed. "It's the end of the world." "It would behoove you to take this more seriously," Elusia chided. "I am serious," Chirun said. "It's just all our lives we run around making plans, and it's like the end of the world is here." He chuckled darkly. "I thought there would be more running around, screaming, action of some kind. Instead, it's let's lock ourselves in a room, hide." "I assure you," Cuthor said, "that once things are set in motion, everything will move very quickly indeed." The door opened and a zebra soldier, with the markings of the zebra equivalent of corporal, walked in. He saluted Elusia and spoke. "Ma'am, the ambassador is downstairs with the sergeant." "Bring them both upstairs and stand by momentarily for new orders when you do." A crisp salute, a closing door. I'm not consistent with the voices. Okay, well, let's go. Remember when I read the original one, it was just for me? Now I'm trying to do voices. Okay. Anyways, a crisp salute, a closing door. Chirun got up and walked over to the same side of the room as Kuthor was, while Elugia stood up in the center of the room, ensuring she would be the first thing the ambassador would see. A knock on the door and an announcement. His Excellency, the Zebrican ambassador to Equestria has arrived as requested, madam. In. The door opened. The corporal stepped in, holding the door open. Behind them stood a handsome, middle-aged zebra stallion, and another soldier, wearing the rank of sergeant. The zebra stallion's face briefly showed confusion before his training changed into a politely pleasant visage of fictional calm. Your Grace, when did you return to Canterlot? Step in, Ambassador, and let me speak to the soldiers momentarily. Elugia addressed the sergeant. Sergeant, the time has come when we can no longer merely hide indoors. Fetch yourself and your soldiers some food immediately. Then, when you are done eating, I want you, Sergeant, to go alone to the Canterlot Central train station and await the next train inbound from the coal fields. You will spot a young zebra mare among the departing passengers. I have not been provided her name, but you will recognize her as she will be wearing the gold bracelets and gold necklace of a high shaman, and she will be carrying a wooden briefcase. When she arrives, escort her immediately to the door of this hotel, and send a good corporal here to advise me of her arrival. The sergeant and the corporal both saluted, and the corporal closed the door behind his retreating form with a snap. Ambassador? Elugia prompted. Your Grace, as I was saying, I was not aware that you had returned. And why are you here? You should be staying, of course, with me in the ambassadorial residence, not in this hovel. Good to see you again, Jakohlom. It was not Elugia who had spoken, and Jakohlom turned to face the far end of the room, from where his mentor's voice had emanated. Kuthor and Chirun stepped forward. Jakohlom seemed disconcerted. Elder Kuthor, Minister SHY-roon, good to see you as well. What is going on that require all of you to... Then the gears turned in the ambassador's head. Have you been here? All this time? Did you never leave? My dear Jakohlom, Kuthor replied as he stepped in front of the ambassador. When I pulled you aside, that day, 3 years ago, to talk about this city, in this country, in this posting, what were my first words to you? Jakohlom stood there in silence, searching his memory. That conversation had been long and intense. Clearly Kuthor meant something memorable, unique, the thing that started it all. You said, there are 4 now. That's a table, Jakohlom ventured. Yes, Kuthor confirmed with a wry smile. The ascension of first Cadenza, and then Twilight Sparkle meant the prophecy was in motion, the destroyer was on her way back, and your job, he jabbed Jakohlom lightly, almost playfully, in the chest, was to let us know when she arrived. Jakohlom stared quizzically. Yes, of course. We saw her, Kuthor stated. The destroyer. Jakohlom bowed his head respectfully. Elder Kuthor, you have manifested the gift of prophecy. Please grace your humble servant with your new wisdom. What did you see? Prophecy was a gift held in the highest esteem among the zebras. Generally, it manifested itself among the highest ranks of shamans, but if any zebra were to break with the mold, Jakohlom was sure his brilliant mentor would be the one. He prepared himself to look upon Kuthor with new eyes, to absorb his vision, and to analyze it for information. This information would then in turn allow him to create new parameters. How rude it was then! The Jakohlom's train of thought was interrupted by SHY-roon's peal of laughter. Jakohlom looked up in confusion. He turned to Kuthor, who only smiled at him, warmly. No, condescendingly. Here in Canterlot, 11 days ago, an hour or so before we last spoke face to face. Jakohlom spun around and looked at Minister Elugia. She nodded solemnly. We all saw her, all 3 of us, and the gods as well. Jakohlom faced Kuthor. How? Where? At the all-night diner by the castle. Donut Joe's? Yes. Jakohlom's face twitched. His brain switched gears and chased down lanes, but nothing connected with anything. He was completely at a loss. I am sorry, but Elder Kuthor, you know full well that is not possible. impossible! You and I created a set of parameters for this search, which I have adhered to throughout these years. The destroyer is not going to appear out of nowhere, least of all at the favorite hangout for off-duty castle garrison officers. And yet we saw what we saw, Minister Elugia retorted. Jakohlom sat down on the floor, planting his rump firmly against the rather rustic wooden floorboards. His position was the apex of a triangle, whose other points were Minister Elugia to his left, and Minister SHY-roon and Elder Kuthor to his right. Jakohlom looked between them before settling on Elugia. Please, Minister, tell me, what did you see? We left the ceremony. As you'll recall, we told you that since it was SHY-roon's first time in Canterlot, he wanted to walk around a bit. You bid us farewell and returned to your home with half the guards. We took the other half of the guards and went for the walk. It was dispiriting at first, since everything around the castle seemed to be closed. However, we saw one establishment that was open. The place was empty when we walked in. The owner himself attended to us. He was very serviceable. Gave us donuts and coffee on the house. I found the donuts too sweet, but the coffee was surprisingly good. The place did not stay empty for long. A pair of drunken-looking pony stallions stumbled in. Then some unicorn couples seemed to come in. We decided to wait for the clients to leave before we made our way out of the shop so we would not be noticed. We planned to head down to Market Square, since Kuthor reminded us that that would be the part of Canterlot most likely to still be active at that hour of night. Suddenly, we heard a mare shouting angrily. I sent the corporal to investigate and to provide aid if necessary. The corporal bolted back to us looking pale. He told me the mare was none other than the destroyer. Of course, I thought this was an outrageous thing to say, so I peeked out my head from our booth to see for myself. What I saw was what appeared to be a very tall unicorn mare yelling at a stallion. I couldn't see her for long because right then Joe got involved in breaking up the fight. But she had slitted dragon iris eyes, much like you would find in a thestral, and her fur was glossy jet black in color. She seemed to be wearing a jumpsuit of the kind you would see on some of the Pegasi or thestral guards. But it too was jet black, like her fur. After the fight seemed to be over, I decided that I wanted to go and talk to her. I figured since she had just been harassed by a drunken stallion, she would be more amenable to an older mare talking to her than to any of the rest of us. But Kuthor vehemently disagreed, saying it was too dangerous and we should observe from afar. I agreed that she was interesting looking, and the corporal, who had gotten a better look than I had, certainly seemed genuinely terrified of her. But at the time, I saw no reason to view her as a danger. Minister, Jakohlom interjected, keen to see us on this observation. Minister, Jakohlom interjected, keen to seize on this observation. Why didn't she seem dangerous to you at the time? Because she looked really young. She was taller than any unicorn I'd ever seen, but there was something to what I glimpsed in her features that made her seem young. And there was a general ungainliness to her, as if she wasn't yet used to the body she had grown into. Of course, it was a good thing I didn't go talk to her, SHY-roon laughed. Elugia glared at SHY-roon before continuing. Before I made a decision, it became clear that the fight had begun again. I could hear the stallion yelling drunkenly at the mare and the sounds of a scuffle. I got up to go help her. Kuthor was close behind. Poor Kuthor crashed into me when I abruptly stopped. I had to stop. She had wings, Ambassador, not bat wings. These were covered in long, black feathers, the wings of an alicorn, not a thestral. She was not yelling at her attacker. No, she was snarling at him like a leopard. And that wasn't where the resemblance ended, for the fangs in her mouth would have fit in a leopard's quite easily. Next thing I know, she had thrown with her magic the stallion against the wall so hard she made a dent with his body in the wall. This idiot was so drunk he kept attacking her. At some point she was able to talk and he asked her something that sounded she asked him something that sounded very much like, "Do you know who I am?" There was this charge in the air. Very powerful horn magic, of the kind I have only experienced feeling once before, when Celestia raised the sun in my presence. Finally, the shop owner came back from wherever he had gone off to and stopped the fight. I have no doubt the stallion would have died if that had not happened. Jakohlom stared. His mind was trying to process all of this. But I have not heard anything about this in 11 days, he ventured. I mean, Joe of Donna Joe's is a retired military intelligence officer. It's 3 blocks from the palace. Every officer in the garrison of the Royal Guard goes there. By daybreak, the city should have been crawling with guards. This place would have gone on lockdown. I would have heard something. Elder Kuthor spoke up. Funny you mention him, Joe. He knows her. He talked to her after all of this, calmed her down. I spoke to him when he left. He seemed unsettled that I was asking questions about her. Jakohlom now looked at the floor. His mouth moved on occasion, but nothing came out. He was clearly thinking hard. How could it be that the Destroyer was a sworn enemy of the Equestrian throne? Or at the very least a sworn enemy of Princess Celestia? That she would feel comfortable hanging out at the preferred hangout of Celestia's personal bodyguards and casually chatting with its owner, a retired intelligence officer, was insanity. Walking into Donna Joe's was like walking into both the Equestrian High Command and the EIS's headquarters on Ponyanka Lane at the same time. And yet there was no reason for the Foreign Affairs Minister, the new Defense Minister, and the Defense Minister's advisor, who had been the ambassador's own mentor, to make up such a story. How could they have all been fooled? There was some connection he was not seeing, some thread he had not picked up, and then the thread appeared clearly in his mind. In the same way, a single golden thread is clearly visible when it lays atop a pillow of black velvet. Minister Illusia, you said this mare looked young, correct? How young? I don't know precisely, maybe late teens. Did anyone get a good look at her cutie mark? Chirun guffawed dismissively and shouted, we were rather more focused on the fangs, the eyes, the wings. No, Ambassador, Illusia replied. As I thought I mentioned, she was wearing some sort of garment. It was skin-tight, meant to be aerodynamic, I would guess, since it had some kind of opening for her wings, covered just about her entire body. That was not the Destroyer. Jakohlom stood up, the world making sense again. That must have been the look-alike. The what? It was unlike Kuthor to shout, and the older stallion trotted over so quickly he seemed to fly before standing firmly in front of the ambassador he had personally trained and dispatched to Equestria with the goal, above all, of looking for any sign of the Destroyer. What look-alike? Kuthor hissed. There is some unicorn filly who lives here in Canterlot, who looks like the Destroyer, that's all. That must have been whom you saw. Shee-run tried to yell something about wings, but Kuthor silenced him with a hoof wave. There is a look-alike of the Destroyer, and you failed to investigate this and report it back to us? Well, I didn't report it because she is not the Destroyer, and we agreed communications on that issue were to be at a minimum, since the ponies are not supposed to know I'm looking for her at all. How can you be possibly so sure she's not the Destroyer? Because apart from jet black fur and slitted eyes, she fit none of the profile for the Destroyer that you and I created together, Elder Kuthor. Jakohlom felt emboldened. How could Kuthor argue against the logical framework that they had jointly created? Jakohlom declaimed as if reading from notes in a speech as he recited the psychological profile for the Destroyer that he and Kuthor had created before Jakohlom departed the Zebrican capital. The Destroyer always appears in public as a full-grown mare. We understand that the apparent age of an alicorn is a function of their magical power. So if the Destroyer is not at her full power, she won't make a public appearance. Instead, she will hide until she gains strength or builds an army, like she did the 3 previous times. Only once she is strong enough will she make her public appearance, and when she does, she will make her move immediately, and her move will be to strike down or imprison her hated enemy, Celestia Sol Invictus, as she has done 3 times before. Jakohlom looked directly at Kuthor, changing the tone of his voice to a more intimate, almost conspiratorial one, though he spoke clearly and loudly to ensure every zebra in the room could hear. And so I have followed the instructions you gave me to the letter. I have created a network of informers among our zebra traders that crisscrosses Equestria. Above all, they were to look for any anti-Celestia seditious movements, any groups who might prefer seeing the Moon Witch on the throne, or similar. In all this time, only once have I heard rumblings that I decided needed to be investigated. But that turned out to be a cult, led by some crazed unicorn that was trying to change her cult members' cutie marks to an equal sign. Celestia must have caught wind of it, for she sent her protege, Twilight Sparkle, to dismantle it. That was it. Nothing more. The destroyer, I assure you, has not returned. Jakohlom raised a hoof to stop the storm of protest that was beginning to regain the room, and promptly continued his lecture. However, 2 summers ago, and again this last summer, I heard rumors that there was a filly spotted that closely resembled the destroyer in appearance. They never mentioned wings as far as I can recall, instead describing her as a unicorn, or at least that is what I understood at the time. She may have ascended since. I did in fact start to investigate, and quickly determined this lookalike was merely that, and not the destroyer. The main reason I reached that conclusion was that all the sightings happened in an awfully specific location. This location. Canterlot. And they all took place in the middle of the day, usually on crowded market weekends in the busiest streets in and around Market Square, where this filly was spotted talking to passers-by, merchants, royal guards, and multiple regular civilians alike, none of whom so much as blinked at her appearance. In one occasion, one of my informants spotted her having lunch in an outdoor cafe in the company of several locally notable unicorns. The most interesting one, in my opinion, being none other than the Lady Twilight Velvet, the mother of the aforementioned Princess Twilight Sparkle. Very odd behavior for Celestia's sworn enemy, to hang out in a cafe in the middle of Market Square on a crowded summer weekend, eating with the mother of Celestia's hoof-picked protege, wouldn't you think? But the clincher was the cutie mark. Recall, I just spoke of a cult that tried to modify cutie marks. The moment the leader was stopped, all the cutie marks reverted. My research indicates that cutie marks cannot be permanently altered. 2 summers ago, one of my informers got a close enough look at this filly to determine that she bore a cutie mark. It was not the Moon Witch's cutie mark. It was a metallic blue kite shield. This past summer, I specifically asked the zebra merchant of my confidence, a merchant whom would spend the summer season working a stall in Market Square, to keep an eye out for this filly, and to see if she could take a good look at her cutie mark. She spotted the filly, and indeed reported on her cutie mark. She too reported a metallic blue kite shield. I am willing to bet that that was the cutie mark under that jumpsuit. Jakohlom now spoke slowly, his control upon the world fully regained. The mare who has caused all of this anxiety is a local Canterlotian filly. She seems to have recently passed the age for her social debut, and given her apparent absence from last year's Grand Galloping Gala, which I had the honor of attending, I would guess she is not high nobility. However, the locations she frequents and the company she keeps indicates that she is well born, probably a member of the lower nobility, well connected enough for her existence to be something Celestia is certainly well aware of. She is clearly not interested in hiding, is my point here. She should be easy enough for me to identify and find. And now that she seems to have ascended, we will have to keep a close eye on her. But I assure you, she is, at the most, another Princess Cadenza in the making. She is not the destroyer, Jakohlom concluded. Kuthor seemed unmoved. You seem to be willing to make a pretty big assumption, Jakohlom. You seem to think the ponies are to be trusted. You seem to think that if they did indeed spot the destroyer, they will attack her. I think the ponies have gone to you. SHY-roon, can you get me that document I told you about? SHY-roon walked past Kuthor and Jakohlom, even past a quizzical-looking Minister Illusia, and came back holding in his teeth what appeared to be a manila envelope. At Kuthor's direction, he tossed it on the bed closest to Kuthor. Kuthor turned to Jakohlom. You are a smart stallion, and at this point you're asking yourself, what is in there? Kuthor pointed briefly at the envelope, and then turned back towards the front, squarely facing Jakohlom. But you are also asking yourself some other questions. Why did we not report to you what we saw when we returned to the embassy that night? Why did we lie and say we had to leave the city and return home immediately? Why have we since remained hidden here in Canterlot? None of us doubt what we saw. We only understand that now is time to take action. And you more than anyone else in this room know how serious that action is. Any moment now that corroboration will arrive. You have a sample, Jakohlom said. It was a statement, not a question. Yes. You should have come back that very evening and told me what you had seen. We would have put you right back on that airship straight home. We would have told the ponies you needed to get back, and we have gotten you all back the next day. You would already know. Instead, I had to tell Princess Celestia that you had to leave immediately for some unknown reason. She seemed really puzzled, since the fastest way back, of course, would have been the Equestrian airship that brought you all here. That was an odd and uncomfortable conversation. I think she decided not to press further when she realized I did not know anything else. Now I hear you were asking about Don and Joe about the destroyer. You can be all but guaranteed that you've been the talk of Ponyanka Lane all week. It's a good thing you stayed underground. But honestly, Elder Kuthor, a rather odd way to behave if you think that the destroyer is loosed upon the world. Don't worry about all of that, Kuthor responded. Rest assured, measures are in place to cover our tracks. We have not come for the destroyer tonight, Jakohlom. Tonight, we have come for you. Jakohlom just stared at his mentor. It was not a pleasant stare, reflecting a mix of defiance, anger, sadness, and confusion. You have lost our trust, Jakohlom, not theirs. He waved airily in a dismissive wave that Jakohlom understood meant Illusia and SHY-roon. But those of us that have been preparing to save this world. Those of us who sent you in this most important duty. All of your assumptions are based on your beliefs about how the ponies think and feel. You assume that Celestia did not lie to us when she flew to the capital city immediately after the weeks of despair. I understand she did not fly anywhere else first. We were first priority, as if she knew we were about to act. If she didn't know, and I am sure she did, then she had a lot of motivation to stand there and tell me what I needed to hear so as not to act. As opposed to telling me the truth. You assume, Jakohlom, my friend, that because the Destroyer has acted against Celestia in the past, Celestia views the Destroyer as an immediate threat and would in turn act against her. You act as if Celestia is on our side. Jakohlom interjected. An absurd accusation, Kuthor. The title of Elder tossed away in the hidden when Celestia has always been a friend to Zebrica. We just celebrated the 100 years of the war. Kuthor cut him off. The war. Funny that. The war, where she only intervened when we were winning and had the Minotaurs on the run. Jakohlom erupted. That is unfair. You know that our own history records states that Celestia sent emissary after emissary to the Minotaur Empire. Oh, emissaries! To talk with no effect. And then she did it again and again. Blah, 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 blah. All talk, no action. All Celestia knows is talk. Celestia is completely cut off from reality. She does not act. She does not lift a hoof. She just talks about harmony and friendship and how we should all get along. And meanwhile, we were dying. But the moment we start winning, she flies in to broker peace and stop our victory against the Minotaur aggressors. In the end, Celestia's actions show her equine supremacist. What? I have never felt any kind of discrimination or any, not against us, you dolt. Against the Minotaurs. These ponies who make up Equestria's ruling classes walk around all high and mighty, thinking they treat all their neighbors with fairness. But the moment the Minotaurs start ripping us in two, they shrug it away. They're Minotaurs! What can one expect from such brutes? The soft bigotry of low expectations. The moment we gain the upper hand through all that sweat and toil and rivers of zebra blood, and the ponies change their tune and they're all like, oh no, the zebras are equines just like us, we gotta tell them to rein it in. Celestia and her ponies couldn't stand to see us fight back because they think we are like them, soft, fluffy, stupid airheads. And because we zebra had the guts to fight back and defend our families and our homes, they resent us for it. These ponies resent us for it. They think that having courage and acting with decision reflects badly on all equines forever. They demand that Zebrica become a nation of gutless cowards like Equestria, and resent the fact that we did not allow the Minotaurs to drive us into the sea to murder and rape and kill and pillage us, because they know in their heart of hearts that in our place they would have let themselves be exterminated. And now you are telling me, Jakohlom, that we should rely on this nation of cowards to stand against one of their own when the life of every living thing on this planet hangs in the balance? The ponies won't act until it's too late. They'll die yelling out about friendship in their last dying breaths. When reality finally breaks through to the ponies, it will be through the stillness of their no longer beating hearts and their no longer breathing lungs. They are too far gone. Kuthor walked forward and put a paternal hoof on Jakohlom's shoulders. Jakohlom, we are the best hope to save your pony friends. You know full well what will happen if the destroyer is not stopped. Yes, we will sadly have to kill some ponies, and each one of their deaths will be a tragedy, but that number will be a small percentage of the ponies whose lives we will save, to say nothing of all the untold generations of equestrian ponies who will never get so much to so much as exist if we should fail. That was not the destroyer, Kuthor. Kuthor dropped his hoof from Jakohlom's shoulder and pretended to not have heard. Speaking of your pony friends, let's see what's in here, yes? Kuthor reached over to the nearest bed and picked up the manila envelope. He undid the string loops that closed it with a surprisingly dexterous movement and then opened the flap, peering inside. Satisfied the contents were in the desired order, he shook out one content upon the bed. It was a photograph. A photograph showing Jakohlom with his hooves around the shoulder of an extravagantly outfitted pony mare sitting next to him. Both were sitting in a lushly appointed booth in what may have been a restaurant or bar or nightclub. A crystal decanter holding a red liquid that was most likely wine sat in the table in front of them, which was illuminated by a flickering candle. "Who is this Jakohlom and why am I looking at here?" Kuthor asked with a grotesquely affected tone of innocence. Let me give him a grotesquely affected tone of innocence. "Who is this Jakohlom and what am I looking at here?" Kuthor asked with a grotesquely affected tone of innocence. "Her name is Sapphire Shores. She's a singer. This was a year ago at an after party for the Equestrian Music Awards. Her album that year incorporated some Zebrican beats on it. Both her and I had been invited to this after party and I went up to talk to her about her use of zebra music and we ended up drinking together." Said Kuthor, throwing another photograph on the bed. This one showed Jakohlom helping Sapphire climb onto a carriage by pushing her into it, his hoof landing on a particularly curvy part of her anatomy. Or one had to presume it was his hoof, since it was masked and not directly visible, due to it being underneath her skirt. "Oh, she was drunk and needed help getting into the carriage," Jakohlom, clearly uncomfortable, said. "Ah, that's how you help mares get into carriages?" Well, I guess I was drunk too." "I guess that is why you decided to go along for the ride and follow her to her hotel." And Kuthor threw another picture on the bed. This was a picture of Jakohlom helping Sapphire out of the carriage while parked by the side entrance of the Grand Canterlot Hotel. In a rather gentle, courtly way, by extending a hoof, it must be said. "Who took this picture?" Jakohlom asked, but he was cut off by a raucous laugh from SHY-roon, who had trotted over to the other side of the bed to leer over the pictures. And then Kuthor threw the last picture on the bed. It showed Sapphire standing halfway out of a darkened doorway and into an elegantly carpeted, well-lit corridor. Her front hoof was looped around Jakohlom's necklace. This would be a greatly offensive thing to do to a high-ranking zebra without their permission. But the look on Jakohlom's face in the picture indicated that permission was granted. It was clear that Sapphire was beckoning Jakohlom into what was doubtlessly her hotel room. It was also doubtlessly clear that Jakohlom intended to accept the invitation. SHY-roon laughed and leered, but it was Minister Illugia who spoke after trotting over to look at the pictures. "Honestly, Elder Kuthor, I fail to see the relevance of this salacious story in light of everything that is happening." Jakohlom scrutinized this last picture. How was it taken? How could it even exist? The picture seemed to be taken from the inside of a room on the 3rd story of the building across the alleyway through the leafless branches of a tree. Had that branch been cut to provide a better view? Then through the window on one end of the corridor by a photographer who must have known precisely which room was Sapphire Shores and then staked that room out. Who would do that? A paparazzi? Presumably, but this level of intrusion had to be illegal. It was stalking or something. Who the hell took this? How did you get this? Jakohlom exclaimed. That's the correct question, Kuthor exclaimed. He had wheeled about himself to face Illugia and had now wheeled back to Jakohlom, pointing at the ambassador with his hoof and with a look of what can only be described as ecstasy on his face. The answer to Jakohlom's question is the same as the answer to your Grace's question. Go ahead, Ambassador. Grab the picture. It's yours now. You may even rip it up if you like. But first, why don't you turn the picture over and see what's on the back? Go ahead, Ambassador. I'm restarting, so I'm probably repeating the last paragraph, so just you know. Go ahead, Ambassador. Grab the picture. It's yours now. You may even rip it up if you like. But first, why don't you turn the picture over and see what is on the back? Jakohlom flipped the picture with his hoof, scanned the back, and then flinched back as if an asp was lying on it. In the middle of the back of the photograph, there was written in block lettering in dark blue ink, "Secret, Canterlot, eyes only." On the bottom right-hand corner was the logo of the EIS. Kuthor spoke. Seems like your friend Joe is not the only one with sources in Ponyanka Lane. I had my own. Pass that to me. Kuthor continued. It is called a honeypot. The Equestrian Intelligence Service recruits a notably attractive mare who feels like having an adventure while simultaneously doing her patriotic duty, and sends her off to the bed of someone that they want to get information from. In the best case scenario from their perspective, you let something slip during pillow talk, like say that your diplomatic role is a cover and you're actually here looking for the destroyer. At the very worst, they now have embarrassing photos to use as blackmail. Jakohlom looked up at Kuthor, and Kuthor noticed the hurt in his face. Oh, don't feel too bad, Jakohlom. They mostly do it to other ponies, underworld ponies. Not the hardcore gangster types, but fences and those on the edges such as lawyers and businessmen who they think they can turn into informants. It's quite clever. We'd absolutely do it ourselves if we let a lot of ponies visit the capital. In fact, I know of one company in the quarry that got a better deal from an equestrian company by threatening to mail some pictures showing just how much fun their negotiator had had in the quarry to said negotiator's husband in Manhattan. It is a tale as old as time. I am sure pictures like this were taken within a month after the first camera was invented. I swear I didn't tell her anything. You don't know that, as you yourself admitted you were drunk. Besides, she was hardly the only one. No pony has ever threatened me with anything like this, or shown me anything like this, or even so much as spoken to me about. Kuthor cut him off by waving his hoof dismissively. Doesn't matter. They already had the goods on you, and it was up to the EIS to drop the hammer at their convenience. They had you, quite literally by the balls, and you didn't know it. The most useful slave is the one who thinks he is free. Kuthor lowered his face to just an inch away from his former proteges. Make an executive decision, Jakohlom. Put yourself in my position. How could you possibly know whether the ambassador you sent to collect the most sensitive information imaginable was now compromised? And once it is a given that you could no longer be assured of his integrity, wouldn't the logical action be to assume he is indeed compromised? Do you now understand why we have been locked in these stinky, stale rooms for the last 11 days? Do you now understand why instead of taking the sample home, we brought the test here? Because if the test confirms Destroyer is here, then I cannot allow you to have contact with anyone else. If it is confirmed that the Destroyer is loosed upon the world,
The next room that your voice will be allowed to fill is the room in which your court-martial is held.
Jakohlom's elegant, rugged face. The face that had given courage to the zebras under his command during his days as a daring reconnaissance officer in the Zebrican army. The stoic face that had reassured so many high-ranking zebra officials during a storied career. The face that had partaken in elegant conversation with the sun herself. The face that had made so many mares, zebra and pony alike swoon. That face was now a quivering mess, shaking, tears forming at the edges of his eyes. It was a pathetic sight. His voice came out strangled, harsh, an acidic cry more than a statement. Kuthor, I swear! Which was, in retrospect for Jakohlom, an excellent moment for the door to the room to burst open. The corporal trotted in, scanned the room, located Elugia, foreign minister of Zebrica, saluted her, then spoke. The shaman has arrived. She is downstairs, just inside the lobby with the sergeant. She has the kit? Yes. Alright, corporal. I want you to step outside, close this door, and then wait right outside the door, counting slowly to yourself to 500, so as to give us time to prepare. Then head downstairs and bring both the shaman and the sergeant upstairs and into this room, understood? Yes, ma'am, the corporal responded with a sharp salute. The corporal's face then looked somewhat embarrassed as he stared down the corridor, starting to mentally count. Before he realized the door was still open, he reached out and shut it with a snap. Elugia began barking orders with authority, showing no deference whatsoever to the egos or titles of the other zebras in the room. Kuthor, vanish those damn photos out of sight. Jakohlom, put yourself back together. Shee-run, just pretend that you're a zebra worthy of respect. This stupid squabbling ends now. The shaman is here. The truth is here. It is go time. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5. You Can't Hide Magic Redux. Part 2. Zondri. The train slowed suddenly. The resulting disconnect between her inertia-driven body and the bolted-on seat cushion upon which she rested jolted Zondri awake. Not an unwelcome development. It had been a restless, disturbed sleep filled with amorphous visions and a vice-like aura of dread. Another steep deceleration caused Zondri to protectively place her hooves over the large wooden case that sat next to her. It resembled the kind of carrying case that would be used to house a portable chess or checkers game, but grotesquely oversized, with a strap on it clearly meant to be wrapped over the barrel of a pony or zebra in order to securely carry it. The contents of it were far from a game. There were only 3 of these kits in existence. One of the ingredients, a set of metal shavings, was literally unique. And once it was consumed, no such kit could ever be used again, let alone manufactured. Very few zebras knew of their existence. Less than a dozen hoof-selected shamans had been trained to properly use the contents. All of them hoped that any future occasion in which the kits were called for would turn out to be false alarms. Otherwise, the world ends. A third sharp jolt caused Zondri to unroll the screen covering the window and peer outside. It was night now, and the world outside was dark. But Zondri could tell the train tracks were heading upwards and curving tightly, causing the jolts. The tracks were hugging the outer flanks of Mount Canterlot. Her destination was near. The lights flickered as the speaker of the train's public address system turned on. Next stop, Grand Canterlot Station! Said an overly enthusiastic voice, though the effect was somewhat diminished by the gravelly static. Zondri examined her surroundings. The Zebrican government had upgraded her to first class. Her compartment consisted only of 2 long bench seats facing each other, with a sliding wooden door separating her from the corridor. Of course, the entire compartment had been bought out. The idea being to give Zandri complete privacy in the journey, so there would be no single-serving friend. To strike up a conversation with her, ask her about the contents of the case, or, in the worst-case scenario, be able to describe her to prying Equestrian authorities. Zandri had never locked the sliding door, and one of the jolts must have opened it. The door now rolled to and fro, in time with the swaying of the train. Zandri looked at the door and then through it and across the corridor. Her eyes met those of a curious young light blue filly across the way. The rattling door must have caught her attention, Zandri mused, and now the zebra across the hall keeps it here. The filly raised her hoof in greeting, and Zandri returned it. The filly smiled, and Zandri smiled back. And the filly spoke to a darker-colored stallion hidden in the shadows in the bench opposite to her. The stallion was looking out the window and pointed at something outside. This caused the filly to excitedly peer out hers as well. Zandri returned to her window, but again could see nothing outside. She squinted and got closer, but all that happened was that her breath fogged up the window pane. So she lowered the window, letting in the cold air, and a screaming, whooshing sound that startled her. She almost cowered as she felt her eardrums pop from the change in the air pressure. Then she noticed that the light from the lamp in her compartment was being reflected by the air outside. No, not air, bricks! The train must have pulled into the tunnel underneath Mount Canterlot just as she opened the window. She was at her destination. The brakes of the train squealed in time with her breaths as she tried to calm down and focus. At no point in her life would the steadiness of her hooves or her mind matter as much as in the next few hours. Unexpected light poured in from the windows. Suddenly the darkness outside was pierced by light from storefronts and street lamps. Zandri clutched the case as the soaring mass of bronze and glass that was Grand Canterlot Station welcomed the train into its bosom. The machine came to a halt. Zandri smiled as the filly and her father walked past, the filly giving a final wave. Then, when as instructed, she was sure the carriage was empty. Zandri stepped into the strap and tightened it securely around her, the kit itself against the left side of her body, and left the compartment. She descended from the carriage onto the platform and looked around. It was an extraordinarily alien sight for a Zebrican. The station was a relatively recent vintage by Canterlot standards, a mass of soaring metal and vaulted glass ceilings designed to maximize the volume of air contained within them. It was as if someone had taken a look at a mass of frothy bubbles collected upon a bar of soap and decided to recreate the bubbles and call it a building. There was glass everywhere, above and around her. She spotted a few other zebras who appeared to be merchants who supplied the coal fields and had come to Canterlot to restock. Most of the platform, however, was filled with ponies of every tribe and color, embracing each other in greeting. At the far end, however, was a zebra stallion whose eyes locked straight into Zandri's. He stuck out instantly, for unlike the other handful of zebras, he was not dressed in a traveling cloak, or indeed at all. Instead, he wore a light petrol in the color of gourds, and feathers that made it clear he was a zebra soldier, rank of sergeant, belonging to the ceremonial guard that accompanied dignitaries at their personal protection. He ran his eyes down her neck and front legs and hooves, doubtlessly scanning the golden bracelets that announced her rank as shaman, then sharply saluted her and headed off at a trot. No introductions, no names exchanged, no time. She trotted after, calling out for him. She caught up to him on the street just outside Grand Canterlot Station. "Sergeant, please," Zandri gasped out as she caught her breath. "In this kit are glass flasks and very sensitive materials. I can't trot or gallop, for they might break. The sergeant nodded and started at a fast walk, which he sped up onto, something verging on a jogging trot, once he visually checked with Zandri that she would keep up. They jogged down the streets, their hooves clopping on the cobblestone streets. Zandri looked around at the stone and iron in the buildings. In Zebrica, everything was built in harmony with the environment. Here, though, the ponies had torn up Mount Canterlot and used its innards to build their houses. Tunnels and terraces were gouged into the mountains as the ponies established their dominion upon their environment. Zandri did not like it. It struck her as violent. Now the streets were emptier, the sound of their hooves echoing in the air. They turned a corner and the sergeant slowed down. Zandri caught up and walked along the side. They were heading to a small, 3-story building. It was a modest-looking hotel, and not the embassy as she had expected. In truth, she did not know what the embassy looked like, but this was clearly not it. The thing that really caught her attention was what was outside. It was a covered wagon of the kind used in the quarry to carry goods to warehouse once they had been unloaded from a ship. Standing next to the cart were Let's try that one again. Standing next to the cart were 4 burly zebras, who were indeed dressed like sailors, and another zebra soldier, rank of private. The sergeant trotted over to speak to the private, and Zandri took time to examine the cart. In the front was a hitch with harnesses for 6 equines. This would usually indicate the cart was ready to carry a heavy cargo load, which meant Zandri was surprised when she looked in the covered back of the cart and found it mostly empty. 2 benches lined the sides of the cart, clearly places for equines to lie down, and in the center was a large crate of the kind and size that would be used to carry a dangerous animal, like a leopard. Except that instead of see-through bars, the crate was made of hardwood with holes lining the top to allow the creature inside to breathe. Before she could explore further, the shaman noticed the sergeant looking for her. She stepped up and he opened the door of the hotel. They stepped inside a small lobby. There was no one else there except for another zebra soldier who looked at Zandri and promptly saluted her, much to her confusion, then turned tail and trotted up the stairs to the 2nd floor. She heard a door open and what sounded like a small argument. Then nothing. After a couple of minutes in which Zandri could only alternate between trying to listen upstairs or looking at the impassive sergeant standing next to her, she broke the silence. "Excuse me, Sergeant, is there a toilet on this floor? Do you know?" The sergeant looked up to see if the corporal was appearing right at that minute, then at Zandri, then raised his left front hoof stiffly and hooked it to the left. Straight back, last door to the left. Zandri almost commented on his rudeness at refusing to communicate this verbally, until she noticed the glint in his eye. "He's as scared as I am." She felt less lonely. Zandri nodded her understanding and trotted down the hall. She passed the front desk and noted with curiosity it was empty. She pushed open the last door on the left. After carefully pushing it open and finding the restroom inside as empty as abandoned as the front desk, she headed to the last stall. She took her time to set the case on the wall farthest from the door, so she could shield it with her body in case someone came in. Then she gazed into the water, collected in a porcelain bowl. Then she proceeded to fill it with that morning's breakfast, and when that was done, she produced some bile just for the occasion, and once that was exhausted, her body concluded the proceedings with a rousing encore of dry heaving. Finally, feeling thoroughly humiliated, even without an audience, Zandri stepped on the floor level lever and flushed. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. trying to steady her hooves. She then wrapped the carrying case's strap around her body, washed out her mouth, and stepped out, hoping to look more confident than she felt. She reached the sergeant just in time to hear the corporal's hooves quickly moving one floor above. He appeared down the stairs and saluted the sergeant. "They should be ready by now. Her Grace requested you accompany the shaman and myself." The corporal turned to her. "What is your name, ma'am?" "Zandri." "Follow me if you please, High Shaman." And he turned, and they followed. At the door, the corporal knocked. At the opening of the door, the corporal announced, "The High Shaman, Zandri." Her heart beat in her throat, and her mouth had gone dry, which only accentuated the bitterness of the bile she had not managed to wash out. She hesitated. It must have been a second, but it felt like an hour, before stepping into the glowing light emanating from the room. See, the next door neighbors have started their party. Oh well. Alright, so continuing. As Zandri stepped in, the weight of the carrying case with the kit within it felt reassuring. The two soldiers entered after her and closed the door. In front of her was a dignified, middle-aged mare she knew to be the Minister of Foreign Relations, and a younger, somewhat chubby stallion whom she did not recognize, but whose necklace held the macaw feathers of a minister. To her right, clustered around another bed, were a middle-aged but still very handsome stallion whose demeanor reminded her of the Foreign Relations Minister, and Elder Kuthor, the only zebra whose name she knew, thanks to the one time she briefly congratulated her when she was chosen to be trained to use the kits. The Minister of Foreign Relations spoke. "High Shaman, have you ever met any of us?" "Just Elder Kuthor once, and very briefly at that, Your Grace." "I see. My name's Elusia, and I am the Minister of Foreign Relations. This is Minister SHY-roon, Minister of Defense. You know Elder Kuthor, and the other stallion behind you is Ambassador Jakohlom, our ambassador to Equestria." Jakohlom politely lowered his head. Elusia continued. "You know why you have been summoned, then?" "No details have been given to me, as is the agreed-upon procedure. But there is only one reason this kit would be needed. I have only one question. Without giving me any details of how you acquired it, is there a sample?" Kuthor: "Yes." Her muscles ached. She had hoped there had been a tremendous mistake and the entire journey was for naught. She knew logically that would not be the case. But still, there had been hope up to this moment. Elusia spoke. "I hope the fact that you have achieved the rank of High Shaman at such a young age speaks of your talents. You may get to work." Work. In work there was peace. In the rhythm and flow of work there was solace, dignity. The focus on the here and now kept anxiety away. Precise, detail-oriented work gave no quarter to worry. Zandri unwrapped the carrying case from around her barrel and plopped it on the bed in front of her. Both Elder Kuthor and Ambassador Jakohlom cleared the bed. A wide circle formed along the edges of the room, as the 5 other zebras in the room gave her space while simultaneously keeping their eyes fixed upon her. Zandri put the case on the bed and flipped the latches with her hooves. The case sprung open, revealing bottles with cork stoppers hanging inside pouches on the far side of the case. The near side of the case seemed to be empty until she removed the covering. Said covering was a sturdy piece of wood she placed on the bed. Below the case were hallowed areas. Below the covering. See, this is for editing purposes. Below the covering were hollowed out areas from which she removed a mortar and pestle. She also removed a series of small, fluted ceramic bowls. They reminded Jakohlom of something from happier times. What had Fleur called them that time she served me that excellent creme brulee? Oh, that's right, ramekin. Zandri counted out 10 of the ramekins out. She then took out the bottles from their pouches and placed them upright on the wooden surface. There were 5 of them. The bottles were all see-through and contained some sort of liquid substance with the consistency of yogurt or a thin porridge. The first bottle was the largest, and the substance in it was white. To its right were 4 bottles, all apparently the same size. In order from left to right, the substances therein were yellow, blue, pink, and purple. Then at the end, the smallest bottle, black. Black as the darkest, most hopeless, most endless night. Zod rearranged the 10 ramekins, to the bottle, 1 in front of each bottle, 1 behind. Zandri then opened each bottle in turn and poured out a small amount of the gooey liquid into the ramekin directly in front of that particular bottle, leaving the ramekin behind empty. Once she completed this task, Zandri turned around and asked simply, "The sample?" The corporal handed her Kuthor's satchel. She briefly examined it, ensuring the magic preserving potion on it remained potent. Satisfied, she opened the satchel and dumped the contents on the bed. It was a cardboard, disposable coffee cup. It had clearly not been washed, but instead preserved exactly as it had been obtained. Coffee grinds and crystallized sugar were visible on the bottom. Taking a small scalpel in her hooves, she cut off a small strip of it. She noticed a small jar with water on it on a nearby bed table. She took it and emptied a small amount into the mortar, just enough to cover the bottom of the mortar with water. She then dropped the strip of cardboard into it and began mashing it with the pestle, aiming to produce a paste. Illusia spoke. "Hi, Shaman Zandri. While you work, could you explain what you are doing?" Zandri knew the test was of the highest secrecy level, but everyone here was about to see her run the test, and she took the opportunity to fill her mind with something other than the unthinkable. This test is based on unicorn magic, and the first version of this was made for us by unicorns. We have modified it quite a bit since, but the basics are the same. Pound, pound, pound went the pestle. The unicorns discovered that each unicorn's magical field has a distinct pattern. You know how it is said no 2 irises have the same pattern? Like that. Every unicorn and alicorn, due to the horn or special ability or something I don't know what, have a completely unique magical field, utterly distinct from that of any other horned magic user who has ever lived. Well, it turns out that the magical traces that those fields leave are also distinct and different. Sure, the magical traces decay, but they never alter. They just become weaker. Pound, 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 pound. Once the discovery was made, that magical field decay was so stable that it kept the signature. It became clear that the magical traces left behind on objects could be used to identify those unicorns who magically touched the object, with the most recent unicorn leaving behind the most powerful trace. In fact, the most recent unicorn's trace is so overwhelming, it basically erases all previous traces. Once that, pound, 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 was established, well, the Royal Guard Detective Corps knew they had the biggest breakthrough they could ever dream of. Say there is a murder, and they find the murder weapon. One simple test can show if the last pony to touch it was a unicorn. If the answer is yes, then they create a reagent from the murder weapon. A reagent is a potion that reacts when it is exposed to the same stimulus used to create it. So the reagent is made, they collect magical field samples, from unicorn subjects, and when the reagent is exposed to the same magical field that was used to create it, it, well, reacts, and you have your murderer. Clever, Jakohlom said. I thought so too, Kuthor added, which is why once the Moon Witch returned, I commissioned the creation of this test. Oh, sorry, dear, he smiled with genuine warmth at Zandri. I shan't steal your thunder. Please continue. Thank you, Elder. Well, so that version, called an identikit, is sort of the bare bones version. This one is rather more subtle and complex. In In the case of the identikit, you are only trying to match. Here, we are also trying to rule out. So, we have a control group, which is the larger flask. She pointed at the bottle with white contents. Alicorn magical fields have distinct characteristics, which can be used to differentiate it from unicorns. That reagent is made from the fields of several hundred unicorns collected here in Canterlot, as well as in Manhattan, and some visiting unicorns in the quarry. Then, through some really complex potion making, my superiors boiled it down to that part of the trace that is common to all unicorns, but also different in unicorns than in alicorns. In other words, if the sample reacts with a control, we know the trace came from a unicorn, and that ends the test. But if not, we proceed to test the alicorn reagents individually. We have obtained magical field trace samples from all the alicorns except for the baby, but that shouldn't be an issue, right? She laughed briefly at her joke, thankful to let off some steam. Anyways, they are Celestia, she pointed to the flask with yellow contents. Luna, she pointed to the blue flask. Cadence, pink flask. Twilight Sparkle, purple. And, well, she did not name it. There was no need. Instantly, there was nothing but heavy breathing in the room. That's the one that matters. The one that started it all. When Luna returned, Celestia displayed some of her damaged armor to show she had been truly destroyed. Within 2 days, the armor was removed from public view and handed over to some scientists for study. The reason, the Destroyer, it was the first time Zandri had said the name out loud since setting off in this mission, and it hurt to say it. Her magical field on the armor was too potent, too dangerous, they said, which is good for us, because a zebra merchant who had been recruited by Elder Kuthor managed to steal the smallest piece of the armor they had put on display. No one noticed it gone, and that is what was used to create the black reagent, which made this whole idea possible. Illusia spoke up. Is there something in the nature of the alicorns that is manifested in the color of the reagent? Oh no, Sandra laughed. All the reagents look whitish. We just color code them for our convenience using dyes. They are colored the moment they are made to make sure we never confuse them. Will the dyes make it hard to see the reaction if it happens? No, Your Grace. If there is a reaction, you will definitely be able to tell. How much longer until a sample is ready for testing? Oh, it's ready now. I guess I got carried away talking. Alright, I want everyone to line the edges of the room and give me some room, okay? Just give me some space. You will see the reaction if it happens, I promise you. Zandri opened a drawer on the bottom of the carrying case. In it were a set of what looked like metal measuring teaspoons of the kind you might see in a bakery. She took one out and scraped the bottom inside of the mortar. She then took the teaspoon out and emptied the contents onto the ramekin, holding the white sample. The gray paste of cardboard and water slowly sank into the white yogurt-like concoction. Nothing happened. Zandri had to take several deep breaths. The magical trace on the cup did not belong to a unicorn. There are only two reasons why that may be the case. The null hypothesis was that there was no magical trace at all left on the cup. Given the strength of the magical preservation potion on the satchel in which it had been stored, that seemed extremely unlikely. The other reason was that the trace belonged to an alicorn. Once her hooves steadied, Zandri repeated the action and dropped the gray paste onto the yellow goop that was Celestia's reagent. Again, the goop swallowed the paste slowly. Nothing. Gray paste met the lunar reagent. Blue consumed gray, but nothing. Onto the pink. The most exciting thing that happened was a bubble. Finally, the grey paste sank uneventfully below the lavender waves. There was only one left to go. Every breath was an eternity. Every eye blink an eon unto itself. The voyage from the mortar was a millennium. The overturning of the spoon might have been a lifetime. The grey paste, falling, might as well have been a mountain eroding into the sea. Hey, into the black. The moment the paste from the cup that Nyx had held at Donut Joe's touched the top of Nightmare Moon's reagent, an almost blinding green glow erupted from the top of the ramekin. As if it were the light of 1,000,000 candlelight bulbs focused through the lens of a lighthouse, a beam of green light parted the room, racing upwards onto the ceiling. It was so powerful that directly looking at its reflection on the ceiling became physically painful within 10 or so seconds. She had seen this before, of course. They tested the reagents with metal shavings from the destroyer's armor once a year to make sure the reagents performed as needed. But those were tests, drills. "Does that mean?" one of the guards shouted before someone cut him off. "Let me work!" Sandra shouted back, with an authority she had never even dreamed she would ever possess. She removed 2 last items from the inside of the carrying case. One was a small velvet pouch which she carefully placed on the bed as if its contents were unspeakably valuable. They were. Oh. The second looked exactly like a Jack-in-the-Box toy a foal might play with, excepting it was made of solid metal. It was a metal cube about twice the width of one of Zandri's hooves with a crank lever sticking out of the side of it. Inside were a series of interlocking gears covered in diamond dust. It was a portable metal mill designed to pulverize small amounts of metal. Zandri touched the top of the cube and a small hole popped open. She took the pouch and gently let a precise amount of metal shavings drop out and into the mill. She closed the pouch and then closed the opening on the metal mill. She placed a hoof on the crank and turned it violently. A tremendous metallic clattering arose, then dropped into a quieter grind. Sandri kept turning the crank until she could feel no resistance, softly muttering the word "no, no" over and over under her breath. Zandri poured the reagents into the ramekins that she had placed behind each respective bottle. She then touched another part of the metal cube, and a small bowl appeared from the bottom. In it was a dark metallic powder, the milled remains of the metal shavings. Zandri took another measuring teaspoon and dipped it in the powder, and she repeated the same drama as with the paste, this time emptying it into the second set of ramekins. Powder into white, nothing. Powder into yellow, nothing. Powder into blue, nothing. Powder into pink, nothing. Powder into lavender, nothing. Powder into black, a blinding shaft of green light projected onto the ceiling. Zandri did not understand it. She knew her heart no longer beat. She could feel the blood in her veins and arteries icing over. Her lungs no longer filled with air. No breath entered or exited her nostrils. How then was she still standing? Alive? So very horribly conscious? Awake? Finally, Illusia broke the deadly silence. What are the chances of a false negative? What are the chances this was some other unicorn? None, Zandri responded. That's the function of the control group, she said, pointing to the flask in question. Yes, I know, I heard you when you said that. My question is, suppose someone was trying to change their signature. Could it somehow result in a false negative? Could a unicorn messing with their signature somehow change their magical field enough that the test no longer recognizes them as a unicorn? No, Your Grace. As you can imagine, the equestrian underworld is full of ponies trying to modify their magical field signatures. But it never works. Every single time the trace can be identified to an individual as long as they can get a sample from the suspect. And what I have here is a much more advanced version of the bare-bones identikit the ponies use. There's a fundamental difference between alicorn and unicorn magic. I can't explain that. I haven't studied thaumaturgical theory, but the unicorn that was consulted on this when the test was first assigned said that alicorn magical traces have a broader bandwidth when it comes to interacting with the ether, whatever that may mean. It's not something that can be altered. It has to do with how they access magic in the first place. A unicorn can no more accidentally modify their magical field to resemble that of an alicorn than you or I can permanently change our lungs into kills. This was definitely an alicorn. And as for the alicorns, well, we test the test, if you will, every year. At least once a year we gather a sample from all known alicorns, excepting the baby and obviously the destroyer, and we test them. And the reactive agent only ever lights up for the correct alicorn. No misfires, not ever. And as for the destroyer, well, I just double tested it in front of you, using metal shavings from the destroyer's armor. There's simply no way to deny it. I wish I could, but the truth is the truth. The magical field that held that cup is the exact same magical field whose trace is so soaked and suffused the destroyer's armor. Elusia looked at Jakohlom. His eyes silently pleaded with hers. Elusia pressed on, asking the question for him. Grand Shaman Zandri, consider this carefully, please. What if there was a new alicorn? One we did not know existed, one that therefore we had never collected a sample from or had a reagent made for. Is it possible that we could have a false positive that the test thinks it is the destroyer when it's just a new alicorn? No, the magical signature of a unicorn or alicorn is embedded in their very makeup, their DNA, their molecules. I don't know enough to explain how it works. A breath, a pause, then Zandri continued. I suppose if we could get some extensive Equestrian lab equipment, we might detect some small level of reaction to the destroyer sample in Princess Luna's reagent, since you could think of Luna as the destroyer's closest relative, both genetically and in terms of their magic. But as you can see, there's nothing visible to the plain eye in Luna's reagent. Nothing like, well, that. She pointed to the two columns of green light that dominated the room. If this were truly a new alicorn that we knew nothing about, none of these reagents would have reacted. They would have been duds. If I got a sample from the baby, Cadence's daughter, and ran it through the test, nothing would have happened, because none of the reagents would have been made with her field. The only way a new alicorn could peruse... And Zandri drifted off, without finishing the sentence. Elusia prompted her. Yes, High Shaman? Anything you can give us at all would be helpful. Anything. Zandri again. I mean, it's crazy, probably impossible. And in the end, meaningless. But, well, for this to be the result, the new alicorn would have to be the destroyer, a clone of some kind. Say that again. This time it was Kuthar who asked the question. Are you saying that if a clone was made of the destroyer, then this result would make sense? Yes, but not just any clone. It would have to be an exact match of the destroyer. Not just physically, but magically. She could not merely look like her. She would have to have the exact same relationship with the ether as the destroyer, because again, her magic is exactly the same. It would have to be exactly as dark, exactly as powerful, or at least have the potential to be exactly as powerful as destroyers. At which point, well, the clone would be the destroyer, so there would be no difference at all. That's why I said that in the end it would be meaningless. Then in a much smaller voice, it changes nothing. We would still be screwed. Kuthar smiled a cold smile that brought no warmth or joy to his face, nor to the face of any who saw it. Well, there you have it. I think I understand what is happening here. It was known in the past that the destroyer could split herself into multiple different bodies, so the Moon Witch must have found a way to make it permanent. No longer would she need to keep up the facade of Luna and retake her role as the destroyer when out of sight. No, now she would give the destroyer her own distinct body. Kuthar paced around the room, every eye on him. Now here is where Ambassador Jakohlom comes in. I have now no doubt whatsoever that the mare we saw in Donut Joe's is the same mare Jakohlom has been talking about, the look-alike. A strangled sound of surprise emitted from Jakohlom's throat. Of course, she's not a look-alike at all. She's the real deal. Always has been. Her youthful appearance is not a problem, and I'll explain why soon enough. No, the real reason Ambassador Jakohlom was so sure that the look-alike was not the destroyer was her behavior, trotting about Canterlot without a care in the world. The destroyer would not walk into Donut Joe's. The destroyer would not walk through the middle of Canterlot Market on a sunny day.
But of course she would, if the ponies betrayed us.
The air thickened along with the plot. Perhaps they would not see it as a betrayal. Ponies are a rather naive lot, much like we were before the Minotaurs reintroduced us to reality. But we don't know what actually happened 5 years ago, do we? Celestia told me the destroyer had been taken care of, but what did that mean? Precisely. She never told me she had been destroyed, just taken care of. Consider then two pieces of information that have always bothered me. The first is the fact that during the 2 weeks of despair, the figure of the mare in the moon returned to the lunar surface. The second was that persistent rumor we all heard that the destroyer had partaken in some battle with some monsters or saved a town or something like that. Not very in keeping with her character, but the rumors were always there. The ponies never told us how the destroyer made her return. We understood the destroyer had been physically destroyed the summer when the Moon Witch returned. The scraps of her armor, from which we gathered a sample that we just used to identify her, were exhibited to prove her destruction. So then, how did she come back, yet again, 5 summers ago? Most zebras never thought about it. I doubt most ponies did either. Just about everyone assumed that Moon Witch must have had another breakdown. But what if that wasn't it? If the Moon Witch was in Canterlot, ruling as a destroyer from the throne, then why was the mare in the moon back? Surely the Moon Witch would not decorate her precious moon with the mark of her imprisonment at the moment of her greatest victory. What if we consider instead a scenario where the Moon Witch actually found herself legitimately imprisoned once again on the moon? Kuthar turned to look at his audience. What if what happened 5 years ago was an experiment gone wrong? He waited a full beat. What if 5 years ago, as an attempt to exorcise the destroyer from the Moon Witch, or perhaps as an attempt to create a new weapon, the Moon Witch, with the help of Celestia and the Equestrian government itself, was able to grant the destroyer her own body. And then the destroyer went ahead and took over the country. And then 2 weeks later, when the Equestrian government finally took back control, they found out that during their absence, the destroyer had channeled her bloodlust by ridding local towns of monsters. And what if then they decided instead of eliminating the destroyer, she could be of use to them as a weapon, and decided to try to control her instead. Kuthar was walking quickly in circles, his physical restlessness mirroring the restlessness in his brain as new connections were formed. The more powerful the alicorn, the larger they are, yes, the older they look. The physical appearance of an alicorn has naught to do with age. Celestia has not aged a day in centuries. No, their size reflects their magical power. Perhaps, in an attempt to control the destroyer, they took away some of her magical power, and this made her look younger. And as time passes and they foolishly trust her, they give her a little more, and she ages. It explains everything, Kuthar exclaimed, now standing still, facing his audience. Why does she look so young? Because she has not recovered her full power. Why does she walk around Canterlot without attacking anyone or getting arrested? Because she works for the sisters now. She probably lives hidden somewhere in the castle grounds or in the guard garrison. The guards know her, that's why they won't arrest her. That is how Joe knows her as well, and why he shouted to the Knight Eternal at her as she left. It even explains why her cutie mark changed. A shield is it now, Jakohlom? Kuthar laughed mirthlessly. How appropriate. A military cutie mark for a living weapon. Everyone was silent, mesmerized. Jakohlom stared back in shock, mouth agape, his brain trying to punch holes in Kuthor's logic, but finding none. It was airtight. As Kuthor claimed, it explained everything. "Oh shit," Jakohlom said, exhaling the breath he did not realize he had been holding. "Indeed," Kuthor said as he slowly walked up to Jakohlom. "And all they had to do was throw some floozies your way to keep you busy and distracted." Illusia spoke. "Shaman Zandri, you may pack up." Zandri opened the last bottle that remained in the case. She emptied the contents into the glowing ramekins, cutting off the chemical reaction and ending the glow. She asked out loud, "Where is the nearest sink?" It was Kuthor who replied, "No sink. We cannot risk it. Everything you brought in here with you, you take back out with you." Zandri's brain froze. Doing that was impossible. It would mean contamination of priceless samples and expensive reagents. Oh, that's right. None of that mattered anymore. She dumped the ramekins and their contents unceremoniously into the carrying case. Everything went in. She covered it with the wooden board and closed the case, locking the latches with her hooves. She stepped into the carrying strap and tightened it. Zandri noted that Elder Kuthor and Minister Illusia were conferring with the pudgy defense minister and the two guards over in a corner. She looked around for someone as lost as she was, and found him on the corner farthest from the other zebras. Jakohlom was sitting on the floor, staring quite literally at a wall. Zandri walked up to him. She felt compelled for some reason to talk to him. "Ambassador," she said. He turned to look at her straight in the eyes, and to her shock, there seemed to be almost nothing there. He was completely gone. He was the most broken stallion she had ever seen. The light in his eyes was out in a way she had not suspected was possible amongst those still living. "Arrest him!" came a voice across the room. It was a voice she had not heard before, and that was how he knew that it was Shee-run, the defense minister. He stood apart from the cluster and pointed a hoof at Jakohlom. Jakohlom barely had the energy to react. The corporal and the sergeant looked at Shee-run with a confused look. They then turned to Illusia, seeking clarification. She curtly nodded. Jakohlom made as to speak in his defense. He stood up. Shee-run laughed, but all were silenced by Kuthor, who called out, "Shee-run, be quiet, please." Kuthor held out his hoof. The soldiers paused. Kuthor came over. He gave a brief and somewhat sad smile to Zandri and turned to Jakohlom. He spoke in a soft voice. It was not unkind. "Jakohlom, please understand. You are now under arrest. Your freedom is revoked. You cannot leave the room except with us. You must come with us back to Zebrica, and you are forbidden from speaking to anyone unless it is one of us. But no matter what Shee-run bleats, I will not humiliate you in public. The last thing we want is to call attention to ourselves." Jakohlom looked at his former mentor, then just sat down in acquiescence. A circle formed in the room. At its center was Kuthor. Everyone else formed the circle itself. It ran through Jakohlom, so Zandri sat at his side. Even Illusia sat on the other end of the room, next to Shee-run and the guards. The torch had been passed. Kuthor was now in complete control. "All right, everyone. Minister Illusia says you're all packed and ready. Shaman Zandri, did you collect all your equipment?" It took Zandri a moment to realize she was being spoken to. She patted the case. "Yes," she replied. Kuthor spoke. "Good. Will one of the guards go see if the coast is clear?" The corporal stood up and opened the door. He stepped outside for a moment, then came back in, leaving the door open. He nodded. Kuthor did not speak. He just motioned with his hooves. Everyone lined up silently. No one fixed the beds or turned off the light or even seemed interested in disposing of some dirty cutlery. Instead, Kuthor carried a satchel and Zandri her case, and that was it. They filed out of the corridor single file. The corporal led the way, followed by both the ministers and Kuthor, then Ambassador Jakohlom and Zandri and the sergeant. Zandri thought the sergeant was placed at the end in case Jakohlom made a break for it. If so, the caution was unnecessary. Jakohlom plodded along sadly and with no commentary. He might as well be a puppet. The entire party moved down the hallway and down the stairs in complete and utter silence. The only sound audible was the soft clops of hooves on carpet and the groaning of the stairs. Zandri assumed that this was to make sure that no one else in the hotel noticed them, though Zandri could not shake the certainty that the entire hotel was completely empty. Why? How? Zandri was not sure she wanted to know. They headed out the front door and into the street, as somber as a funeral procession. A light cold drizzle had begun, granting the cobblestones a glossy sheen. They turned left and walked towards the cart that awaited them. The cart was aimed down the street, and so the procession approached it from the cart's rear. The cart moved briefly as weight shifted inside of it. 4 burly zebras in sailors' outfits came out the back of the cart. Then, from the driver's seat, a 5th zebra came out. He was wearing a long wooden traveling cloak of the kind common to zebra merchants, which made it impossible to know if he was also a sailor at first glance. But his body language made it clear he was the one in charge. The cloaked figure motioned at one of the sailors, and the sailor reached into the back of the cart and pulled out a burlap sack. He began distributing the contents of the sack to all present. They turned out to also be woolen traveling cloaks, purposely oversized, to the point where Zandri could easily fit herself into the cloak without removing the test kit, presumably to mask everything, even the outline of the wearer. Wordlessly, soundlessly, everyone stepped into the cloaks and pulled on the hoods. Zandri felt the wool settle on her head and the sound outside muffle. There was really no sound to be heard other than the constant tapping of the drizzle hitting the canvas tarp that covered the back of the cart. One of the robed soldiers lowered the gate in the back of the cart. And again, wordlessly, as if acting of one accord, everyone who had left the room but the guards climbed onto the back of the cart. The far wall was stacked all the way up with boxes that had clearly been moved out of the way, and Zandri got the impression that all the back boxes were currently empty. The one exception was the large crate in the center, made of sturdy wooden planks with perfectly round reading holes cut throughout it. The crate that Zandri thought was designed to hold a large animal. They all lined up on the sides. Zandri noticed now that she now was between Ambassador Jakohlom to her left and Elder Kuthor to her right. Kuthor leaned forward and opened the latch on the crate, then flung the top wide open. The way it opened, the flash of velvet, made Zandri think of a coffin. No wait, there really was something like velvet. Or maybe satin? Zandri looked in astounded. What she expected to be either empty or designed to hold a wild animal was in fact lined on the inside with a plush satin. The bottom of the crate was spongy. It was probably a thin mattress of some kind. There was even a red velvet pillow that looked like it belonged in a There was even a red velvet pillow that looked like it belonged in a romance novel. Kuthor spoke the first words spoken since they had left the room. "Get in," he motioned at Jakohlom. And again, "Get in." Jakohlom turned to look at Kuthor, advanced one step, and to Zandri's utter shock, simply replied, softly but clearly,
"Fuck you."
Kuthor was nonplussed. "Here, this will help," he stated, and from somewhere in his cloak produced a metallic flask. He held it out and offered it to Jakohlom. Jakohlom stared at it for a while. "If I am to be killed, I wish to be killed on Zebrican soil, preferably by firing squad." Kuthor sighed. "Oh, don't be ridiculous." He unscrewed the top, tipped it into his mouth, and took one long pull. He ran a foreleg across his face and sighed. "It's a sleeping draught, so you can sleep while you're confined in the crate." "Are you reveling in my humiliation?" Jakohlom asked. "No, not really. If we are stopped, you are not to be seen. It's more likely a pony guard will recognize you than any of the rest of us." "I am wearing this cloak, same as the rest of us. We all look exactly the same. The hood can be removed, and if you refuse to remove it when asked, that in itself will make you memorable." Kuthor motioned with the hoof that held the flask, a motion that clearly meant, "Take this and get in the crate." And then, just like that, Jakohlom's shoulders slumped. He grabbed the flask and took not one but 3 long gulps. Then, without meeting the eyes of anyone else present, he settled into the crate and closed the lid on top of himself. The corporal and the private got off of the cart and joined the sailor standing just outside. Zandri realized they had all been standing there waiting, just in case Jakohlom failed to acquiesce. She focused on her breathing as she heard the hooves of the other zebras echoing on the cobblestones outside and around her, the incessant tapping of the drizzle on the tarp above her. Inside, no one was in the mood for conversation. Then the cart took off at a surprising acceleration. Zandri realized the sailors and guards must have all hitched themselves to the 6 harnesses in front. Clearly, there was no time to waste. They had to leave the city and the country, this country, the one they were now at war with. She surmised they were headed for the docks of Manhattan, then a ship, then the quarry. There was silence for a good while. Then, after a good half hour when she could no longer hear cobblestones, and when the lights outside had been replaced with a rural darkness, she felt Kuthor move at her side. She turned to look at him. His eyes were heavy, and he seemed unspeakably ancient. She realized he was falling asleep, and it appeared that inside the crate, Jakohlom was already sleeping. Elder, He turned to look at her. He was, as he had been all night, nothing but pleasant towards her. That sleeping draught, does it cause strong dreams? Vivid dreams? Been bothered by those, have you? Kuthor asked with genuine concern. It is to be expected that a shaman would be sensitive to the changes in the world. But no, my dear, the sleep is completely dreamless. A total blank. He reached into his cloak and took out the flask. He opened it and offered it to her. She took it into her mouth and drank deeply. It was a pleasing, cool liquid that left behind a light, pear-like aftertaste. She gave it back to him, and he smiled wordlessly as he put it away. And then they both returned to staring blankly forward. Across the way, on the other side of the crate, SHY-roon and Lugia stared back. Tired and silent, they may as well be strangers who just happened to hitch a ride on this cart. Soon, Zandri felt Kuthor snore lightly at her side. Her eyes grew heavy, and the sounds of the cartwheels in the rain, now heavier than a mere drizzle, began to run into each other in her mind. The cart slipped and slid a little, but no one stirred except her. The rain had a different consistency. She looked outside, not rain, sleet. The temperature had continued dropping as the night deepened, and now the road was covered in slippery ice. Did it matter? The world was ending, was it not? Did anything matter really anymore? Yes, one thing mattered. Rest. Recovery from her exhaustion. Zandri took a deep breath and closed her eyes. And then another, focusing on the warmth that she slowly felt irradiate from her belly out to her limb. The potion was strong. Despite the freezing temperatures, the warmth was all-encompassing. And then yet another breath. And then sleep. End of chapter 5.